Hello, everyone. My name is Dawn Evans, and I'm the Access Text Network Coordinator. Welcome to this week's webinar on discovering accessible titles. So first, some quick housekeeping items. Live captioning is available by clicking on the CC icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can also enlarge the captioning box by clicking on the upward arrow in its top right corner. This will be a 1-hour session, including 20 minutes at the end for questions. And if at any point you have trouble seeing the bottom of the screen, simply adjust your view options in the top center of the Zoom window. To ask questions or make comments, please use the Q&A pane. You'll find that Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to submit your questions at any time. We have set up an EPUB resources page at bit.ly, that's bit.ly/EPUB-ATN. As soon as we have the webinar recording, we post it on this page along with the PowerPoint decks. The final webinar of this series will take place in 1 week on June 11th at 2 p.m., where we'll break open an EPUB and learn how to make improvements such as adding alt text, table headings, and more. Now, I'd like to turn it over to George Kirscher and Charles Lapierre, who are today's speakers on discovering accessible titles. Thank you so much, George and Charles, for bringing us this presentation. And if you would, please introduce yourselves.
Well, thank you. My name's George Kirscher. I work for the DAISY Consortium, and I also do some work with Benetech. And I've been in the standards and publishing, accessible publishing arena for a long, long time. Charles?
Hello, everyone. This is Charles Lapierre. I'm the technical lead here at Benetech for Diagram and Born Accessible. And George has been helping me sort of over the years learn these standards as we work together to improve accessibility. So thank you.
All right. So we're talking about EPUBs now. And starting out with a little bit of an overview. So the objective is to get fully born accessible, fully accessible EPUB materials into the hands of the students. And we want to make sure that they're really, really accessible, not just somebody saying so. It's got to be proven. The understandability of what the features, the accessibility features are, is something the student and the university needs to understand in advance. Discovery, searching, and finding the materials is super important, and that's a big piece of what we're going to be talking about today. And to make all this really work, we need to make sure we're purchasing born accessible materials. And okay. So we work a lot in the standards arena. And so EPUB has an accessibility standard. It is under the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, the standard setting body for the internet. And it's within the publishing working group. And it's a formal specification that has been approved and is also being moved into international standards arenas. It points to the WCAG 2.0 standard, which we all know about for websites, and uses that same standard, but it adds specific publishing items that are not part of the web, and page numbers are a good example. And we hear all the time that students want to be able to go to a particular page, especially when they're using digital materials alongside their peers that have the print book. The standard identifies accessibility metadata at schema.org, which is how the internet identifies metadata. It's through schema.org. And one of the requirements of a born accessible EPUB, it must have accessibility metadata inside the publication. Okay. Okay, so the publishers produce these EPUB, and this is a brief rundown of what they have to do. So they should be using the accessibility checker for EPUB, ACE by DAISY, which provides automated and manual guidance on how to check the EPUB, and we'll see more about that in a few minutes. It must meet the accessibility requirements of the standards WCAG and EPUB. They got to include the accessibility metadata for discovery purposes and write a great accessibility summary, which is human readable. Anybody should be able to read it, and so that somebody can read this before they purchase. And another piece that we're promoting is get third-party certification of that publication. So VitalSource is one of the big distributors of digital content in higher education in the United States and throughout the world. And they've been the first one to expose this metadata in their catalog. So when they get a title from a publisher, they ingest it. And what they do is open up the EPUB and take out the accessibility metadata that's embedded in there. And they then have an icon on their catalog, an accessibility icon, if there's accessibility metadata in that publication, and they show that it has the accessibility metadata. And you click on that and you can see the accessibility metadata, and they're presenting the accessibility metadata that the publisher provides. They're not interpreting the book, they're just looking at that metadata that the publisher provides. And this is a great example of what should be done by everybody, not only VitalSource, but all the different vendors, Red Shelf, and we need to see this in library catalogs as well. So when VitalSource first came out with exposing the metadata, they just showed the schema.org metadata, and that was a great first step, but we immediately recognized that this was not really great stuff for normal human beings to read, so it needed to be interpreted. So we created guidelines that are publicly available in draft stage, and they're being reviewed now, and I believe VitalSource has participated in the review process and are implementing these guidelines. So it's got to be easy to understand for end users. And screen reader friendly is a good example of interpreting the metadata. And what it means is that the person who's blind using a screen reader can read the whole publication, including alt text, that there's text there. And if that's present, you have confidence that a blind person could use the whole title. So third-party certification, where an independent organization gets involved. The accessibility checker from DAISY is free, open source, anybody can use it. We know that the publishers are using it, and third parties could use the same accessibility checker to review the title just like the publisher did. All the accessibility conformance requirements can be checked, so the WCAG and the EPUB requirements for accessibility. And the ACE checker can check a whole lot of the publication. And, you know, it's 25, 30, 40% of the publication can be checked automatically, but there's things that still need human review. For example, is this good quality alt text or is it terrible? And a machine can't make that judgment. And third-party certification is one of those accessibility metadata pieces that can be placed inside the publication. And so VitalSource or some other company can expose that it was checked by a third party and verified that it's born accessible. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Charles.
Thanks, George. Certified by Benetech is one such third-party certification program called Global Certified Accessible, or GCA. Benetech has partnered with organizations around the world who share our mission to improve the accessibility of books. We require publishers to fix their production workflow such that they will consistently produce verifiable born accessible EPUBs. Once the publisher proves they can reliably produce accessible books, they become accredited and can use Benetech's GCA stamp in every EPUB coming off that production pipeline, as well as any supporting marketing materials to promote their titles as being accessible with a recognizable accessibility seal. Here is a video which outlines our Global Certified Accessible program by Benetech, showcasing the various steps involved in the evaluation of a publisher's EPUB. Let's take a look. Global Certified Accessible, or GCA, is a certification process that is a partnership between Benetech and publishers to help identify gaps in their production pipeline, gaps that are preventing them from producing books that are accessible to people with disabilities. This is an iterative process between Benetech and the publishers, which helps the publishers create books that are accessible from the start. We call these books Born Accessible. We will use the title Fundamentals of Abnormal Psychology from Macmillan Learning to illustrate our process. Let's take a look. The first step in our process is to check the basic validity of the EPUB by running it through the tool epubcheck. epubcheck is free to use, and we encourage all publishers to use this tool themselves. We use the latest version of epubcheck, which has been updated by the DAISY Consortium. We will add to our report any errors or warnings epubcheck finds. As you can see here, no errors or warnings were reported. We are good to continue to step 2. Step 2 in our process is to run the title through ACE, the Accessibility Checker for EPUB by DAISY. ACE by DAISY is a free open source accessibility checking tool which was created to assist in the evaluation and conformance checking of an EPUB against the Accessibility 1.0 specification. This specification outlines the requirements of an accessible EPUB and is the foundation for our GCA program. There are 2 reports generated, an HTML and a machine-readable JSON report. The HTML report consists of 5 tabs: Summary, Violations, Metadata, Outlines, and Images. On the Summary tab, we see all issues ACE found, which are ranked from critical to minor and are categorized as being either WCAG A, AA, EPUB, Best Practices, or Other. On the Violations tab, we see that 3 minor best practice issues were found. This report describes what the issue is, where it occurred in the book, and links to the DAISY knowledge base, which describes the issue and gives examples on how to fix it. The Metadata tab shows the metadata found in this title, including any missing accessibility metadata. In this case, all accessibility metadata was present. The Outlines tab shows both the EPUB's table of contents and the heading outline. This data visualization of the structure of the title helps us determine if there are any navigational issues with this book. We look to see all chapters and subchapters are correctly encoded and that the heading levels are sequential. For example, it does not jump from heading 2 to heading 4. The last tab shows us all images present in this title. For each image, we can see the alt text, extended description, fig caption, where this image is found in this EPUB, and it also tells us what role, if any, is associated with each image. As you can see here, the cover image has a role of doc cover. This second image of 2 pie charts has a short alt text description, a detailed description of all values contained within the pie charts, as well as a fig caption. As I scroll through, you can see all the images in the book, along with their descriptions. As part of our inspection, we manually look over these to ensure that the descriptions are accurate and meaningful. For example, when we notice there is no alt text or extended descriptions, we check to ensure that the image's role is marked as presentation, as shown here. It is only possible to check for some of the accessibility issues with an automatic tool. The remainder must be checked manually, which leads us to our next step in our process. Step 3 in our process is to import the JSON file produced by ACE into SMART, a tool created by Daisy to aid in the manual checking of the EPUB. Here I'm going to select the JSON file. This gives us a head start by populating all of the fields found automatically using ACE. As you see here, it will also eliminate some of the manual checks required for those elements ACE did not find in the EPUB, such as audio, video, scripting, and others. There are 3 main tabs of interest: Conformance, Born Accessible, and Discovery. The Conformance tab has all WCAG A, AA, and EPUB conformance checks. We must go through each one of these WCAG conformance guidelines to ensure this EPUB meets these criteria. When we detect a failure, we add a note describing the issue and where it was found in the book. As you see here, these are some of the checks for audio that were automatically removed. And let's say we found an issue in this section, we would then mark it as a failure and then describe what we found. Once all the conformance checks are complete, we move on to our GCA specific Born Accessible tab within SMART and perform a deep dive in rating over 50 specific areas on a scale from 0 to 4. There are 15 main categories, such as images, tables, lists, audio, video, etc. We will collect some additional information, such as the number of images, lists, tables, heading levels, etc., which gives us a complete picture of the complexity of this title. Let me give you an example. Here in the image section, which is broken down into 6 separate areas. In addition to knowing that the image has the correct alt text, detailed description, or has no description but is marked as presentational, we also check specifically into whether the cover page and title page images, if present, are marked up correctly. We have found that some publishers mistakenly make the cover page inaccessible by failing to provide an alt text description of the cover image. Let's skip down to the accessibility metadata section where we have both the required metadata fields as well as the optional fields. The required fields are access mode, accessibility feature, accessibility hazard, and accessibility summary. We check to ensure that they are accurate and that the summary is meaningful and reflects the accessibility features as well as any shortcomings within this title. The optional metadata fields are accessibility API, accessibility control, which would be important for publishers adding their own embedded media player, for example, which might require added accessibility controls to allow assistive technologies to interact with it. The last optional metadata property is access mode sufficient. While this is technically optional,
We strongly recommend our GCA publishers use it as it is crucial for discoverability since access mode sufficient of textual indicates that the EPUB is screen reader friendly. The final step in our process is to create a set of reports, including those from ACE, SMART, and our own detailed report of all of our findings. Our detailed report highlights items that were done correctly and goes into great detail for all issues we observed. Code samples are provided showing how the publisher could remediate the issues found. Here is an example where page numbers were included but done incorrectly. Adding the semantic role doc-page break and an ARIA label makes these visible page numbers also accessible. We then send these reports to the publisher and offer any clarification about the issues described. Publishers can modify their production pipeline to resolve the issues, and then they send us back the remediated title. We repeat this iterative process, working with the publisher until the book passes with a minimum number of errors. Once the book passes, we request 3 new titles from that same production pipeline for analysis. If those 3 titles pass certification, then that production pipeline is accredited and all books coming off that workflow can now be stamped as GCA certified by Benetech. We do have periodic spot checking to ensure quality control and will continue to keep the publisher informed on any specification changes or best practices within the accessibility standard. We have found this iterative process is a successful collaboration between Benetech and the publisher, helping inform the publisher about gaps in their production pipeline and giving them the ability to create books that are truly born accessible.
And now that we are starting to see born accessible publications in EPUB from publishers, we need to think about the policies that make sense from a university or college's perspective. And the first obvious thought is that if a born accessible version of a title exists, purchase that instead of the inaccessible or unknown accessibility of a particular title. The professors in course development should search for accessibility features, screen reader friendly, and so on, when they're choosing a title for their course. And disabled student service offices should be campaigning within their school and university and system to make people aware of all of these types of things, and promote it within the school and build momentum for it. So here's some things that we feel are in the takeaway from this webinar. So publishers, you gotta use ACE to check the accessibility of your files. What Charles didn't say was the first time publishers run ACE over their files, they're shocked at the number of errors that are found that they have to fix in their production process. Consumers, look for accessibility metadata before you buy. Something really important. The accessibility summary should be well written and explain the features and functions in normal prose about this particular title. And that's an important, it must be there, it's a required element in the accessibility metadata. And this is where the publisher can essentially brag about the great job they've done in making this book accessible. And finally, third-party certification we think is important because we want to just have somebody who's independent, who's nonprofit, who's got a focus on accessibility and reading, to look at these titles and confirm that the production process is indeed delivering consistent born accessible material. And with that, Charles, did you want to add anything?
I was just going to mention that in the accessibility summary, you know, as George said, it's great to showcase all the things that are done correctly, all the accessibility features, you know, that this is a title that has great alternate text and images that are complex, may have extended image descriptions if that's in fact what's in the book. But it could also, you know, highlight some of the shortcomings potentially, like in the references section, some of the complex tables were not described correctly, were not described, or anything that that the publisher didn't have, you know, that it was beyond their control and they couldn't get those accessibility improvements into that book. At least highlighting those so that a person realizes, oh, okay, well, I'll not worry about then the that those references don't have any alt text descriptions, or maybe I can get someone to help me, you know, like a DSO office, remediate that section. So,
And what we're seeing now from the publishers are they're providing extended descriptions of the graphics. These are long descriptions. They're getting subject experts to write a textual description explaining this this complex image. And we've heard from DSO folks that have seen these that said, boy, they've been doing this at their university where they've made descriptions of the graphics, but the quality of what's coming from the publishers that are hiring these subject matter experts is just really terrific. So in the accessibility summary, it would be excellent for the publisher to point out that it's been enhanced with these long descriptions for the graphics. Also wanted to mention that when the accessibility checker goes through and identifies issues or points out things that require manual inspection, it also provides a link to the knowledge base, the accessibility knowledge base, where it explains to the publisher, okay, here's how you make this this feature accessible, whether it's, you know, how to mark up tables correctly, or you know, heading structures or anything. The knowledge base is there as a consistent tool, authoritative, to give the publishers guidance.
absolutely.
Okay.
All right, thank you too. So we've had a couple of comments and a question. We have one attendee who is just nerding out on all of the information you were presenting, so good job. And also just, you know, reiteration of what you were saying, subject matter experts are so important that, you know, we certainly can't know everything when we're remediating files. And this is a question that this is the second time I have been asked this question in 2 days, and I just love it. It's the first time I heard it, I'm like, yes. Will the EPUB metadata or an accessibility summary be shown on ATN's site? I would love to do that.
So you're going to do that?
I would love to. I'm sure that we could find a way. Now, I think it would just be for the EPUBs, obviously, and I would want to use the guidelines that you all are developing and reviewing right now. But I think it's a great idea.
So that would mean the EPUB that passes through your shop, through ATN, you crack it open and grab that metadata and expose it on your website.
Yeah, or we could get the metadata from the Onyx feeds that the publisher sends, perhaps. But yeah, we'll definitely explore that, and I would love to do that. So I will look into the ways to make that happen.
Yeah, and so Onyx, in the guidelines that we we did a crosswalk between schema.org metadata and Onyx metadata, so that there's not an exact one-to-one match, but it's close, and we're working with Editor, the people that do Onyx, to add fields that might be missing so that we can get as close as possible to a one-to-one mapping. And when ACE runs, it pulls out the accessibility metadata. You could run ACE over the title and just grab the metadata from there. So there's different ways of getting at the metadata that could expose it to through ATN.
Perfect. All right. If a publisher is not Benetech certified, how will I know that they are working on this certification and have done ACE and SMART checks?
So in the accessibility metadata, there's a few fields in there. One is called certified by, and so that currently would say Benetech, but if it was a publisher that like self-certified, then it would be, certified by Simon & Schuster or Macmillan Learning, so that you would know that there was a publisher and not a third party. And then there's also the certifier's credential, and that would typically be blank unless it is like a global certified accessible or some other organization that has an accredited certification program. So that's sort of the fields. Now, to know what level of WCAG conformance, there's a conforms to, and that would be a linking to, the WCAG single A or double A to the accessibility 1.0 specification. So you'll actually, and we have guidelines on how to present that to users in that document that is currently being reviewed, on how to make machine readable metadata exposed and meaningful to the average user. So there'll be places, there'll be a way to find out how accessible is this book and all of the different accessibility features. As far as if it's been checked by ACE or SMART, that information, wouldn't be presented anywhere really. It's just, you could tell by just the accessibility features and what's been declared in the book.
And remember that it's always the publisher that's making these accessibility claims and putting this accessibility metadata in the EPUB. And the third-party certification is going along and verifying that and helping answer accessibility questions. So the publisher says, okay, how do I do an ordered list to make sure that the person is going to be able to read list item 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's where Benetech can provide consulting on how to do that.
Great. And was there I'm sorry if I missed it, but is there a link where people can use the SMART tool?
One great resource is inclusivepublishing.org. So we have in there links to a whole bunch of things, resources. There's the guide to different reading apps, EPUB readers that are out there, and the accessibility and which assistive technology works with the different EPUB readers. But also there's a link to SMART, and SMART can be used on a limited basis freely. And ACE is completely open source and available. We have a GUI that is available to run ACE, so you can drop browse for an EPUB and drop it in and run the ACE tool over it as well. Right.
Thank you for that. I'll post that information in the chat so that people will have the link. Is there a list of publishers that are Benetech certified that we could give to faculty members when they search for books?
Ooh, good idea.
Right now, we have one publisher that has been accredited, and that's Macmillan Learning. I'm proud to say they were with us right from the beginning during the pilot stage of helping us design this certification program. But we are working with a number of other publishers right now, and they're in different stages of getting their books tested and also signing contracts, etc. So can't really tell you all who they are, but there's definitely some high, impressive publishers that we're working with, and there will be a page on our bornaccessible.org website that will have all of the publishers that have been accredited. And we're also accrediting some of the conversion vendors to basically be a Benetech approved vendor, so that if publishers want to work with a vendor that knows how to make things accessible, then they could look to that list. And right now, I think Nugent is the only approved vendor, but we have a few others that we're working with, which we'll hope to get them Benetech approved as well.
So the publishers many times will produce and gather the content, but the actual finished product, whether it's an EPUB or a PDF, may be outsourced to one of these vendors. And there's many different vendors that support the publishing industry. It's akin to typesetters from years ago who typeset books, and so many different service providers out there. I know I've submitted a paper for accessing higher ground this coming November, and I've got some of the publishers. So Macmillan, Pearson, Wiley, McGraw-Hill, and Cengage. I think those are the ones that have agreed to participate in this panel presentation, where we would be cracking open their titles and inspecting them with a fine-tooth comb. So while Charles was not able to mention the names of publishers that they're talking to, those are the ones that are using EPUB, and they're all have expressed huge interest in accessibility. And the publishing industry has really embraced accessibility, and with the tools that have been made available and the services that are made available, the publishing industry is being transformed to being born accessible. And everything presented in this webinar today is helping folks understand what they can do on their side, like buy Born Accessible in order to keep this ball rolling. Other questions?
Oh, okay, let's see. How are you making sure that math and science material are accessible for all readers?
Nothing like an easy question.
Exactly.
Okay, wow. Where do we want to start, Charles?
Oh my gosh. Right. We George and I and the leading experts around the world have been working on this issue for a few years now. Right now we have a test book at epubtest.org, which is for mathematics, and to try to figure out what is the best option to allow for math to be put into these EPUBs. because there's multiple issues going on, because the reading system also has to be able to support the mathematics, and the EPUB obviously needs to put the math in an accessible way, and we want to do it in such a way that there's also fallbacks, so that if you can't read the MathML, because the reading system that you're using doesn't support JavaScript and MathJax, for example, we need to have a fallback so that you at least get an image with the description of the math. And the same for chemistry, where George is actually chairing a group right now, community group, or soon to be, for how do we make accessible chemistry, and we're looking at those, and trying to come up with some best practices around that. There's a new community group in the W3C to actually improve the MathML standard, to improve math and to make add some more accessibility semantics, so that you know that this is calculus math versus algebraic math, or if this is a chemical equation that's written in MathML. So these are some of the things that we're working on right now in the standards body, and best practices to support them. What have I missed, George?
Oh, so the presentation of mathematics or chemistry, these things are symbolic as opposed to text. And so the question becomes, how do you represent this symbolic information? And what we want to be able to do is have text-to-speech read a component of a math expression or a chemical formula, see it on the screen, be able to enlarge it for low vision folks, highlight it and read it and walk through it one little bit at a time. And so the question becomes, how can we represent that information and present it on the screen? And MathML is really good. MathJax is 3.0. I don't know if it's still in beta or was released, but it can do all of that with mathematics on the web. The problem, if it's inside an EPUB is just, if you rename EPUB to .zip, you can unzip it and see all the files in there. And it's same thing as on the web, XHTML files, JPEGs, SVG images, CSS for styling. But running on locally, you don't necessarily have all the facilities available that a web server would have. And we're trying to see if we can get MathJax running locally inside EPUBs. But until that happens, we want to provide a best practice. And if you go to epubtest.org and go to the samples, you see the math book there. And inside that math book, there are 8 different ways of presenting the math. The first one is, just an image with alt text, and that's pretty ho-hum. It's actually what's being done mostly today. But then other examples, the 8th one, the final one in that title, has an SVG of the image of math, the alt text of the math, then underneath that a box that you can expand that has the MathML, and if your assistive technology can read it, then it would be able to read that MathML. So JAWS and NVDA both have math reading capabilities. I think VoiceOver has some capabilities as well. But once we figure out which is the best thing to use, we would move that into the best practices and encourage publishers to start using those techniques that that work not only for people with disabilities but for everybody. So that's, you know, a lot of work going on in this domain, and it's very exciting. But as that becomes available, we would add that to best practices and encourage the publishers to do it.
Yeah, and that's part of our GCA program, our commitment to the publishers is as these new best practices come about, we would be informing them and getting them up and using the latest version, because it takes a while to get some of these things into their production pipeline. The turnaround sometimes can be quite lengthy, so we try to give them the heads up when the specs are changing, and give them guidance on how to improve their EPUBs.
So most of the rendering, the presentation, is being done by the web browser that's underneath, because this is all HTML under the hood. So it's the facilities that are provided by Chrome or by Safari, and then the different reading apps will use those underlying substructures for the presentation. So as the web browsers get upgraded and improved, then the reading systems get improved along the way as well. And we also are looking at the EDR Labs open source Readium for EPUB reading systems as well. And if you go to epubtest.org, you'll see a whole flock of different EPUB readers, including Voice Dream Reader, Dolphins, Easy Reader, of course, iBooks, Google Books. All of these are using EPUB. And our friends over at Amazon, in the Kindle store, they recommend EPUB, reflowable EPUB 3 as the ingestion into their service. So they want EPUBs coming in that are high quality for their products.
Thank you. Okay, now for an easy question. I think this is for Charles. Are there any scholarly publishers that you are working with?
We're definitely talking to a few, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and let's see. Are there special locked down environments students have to use to access the EPUBs? I have a lot of students who are Mac users and students who utilize built-in accessibility features in their devices, such as smartphones, tablets, etc.
So we've got, in this webinar series, we've got presentations about blindness tools. So I'm blind, I use a screen reader, and I did a webinar a couple weeks ago about JAWS, NVDA, VoiceOver, using the various tools. So the publishers do want to protect their content. And when they distribute through all of the vendors that I know of, so VitalSource, RedShelf, Apple Books, Google Play, Amazon, Kobo, all of these are EPUB products, but the publisher sends the book unprotected to that vendor, then the vendor ingests the book and adds a protection layer. So you cannot share those books with other people unless, it's like the Apple Books family sharing. You can do that, but within their closed environment, whatever their policies are. So you can't take some of these titles, copy the file out, and put it in VoiceStream Reader. You have to get your hands on an unprotected version of the EPUB in order to what we call side load it into another device. So an unprotected version, I usually put them in Dropbox and read it on my phone or read it on my PC. It opens in Edge on my Windows machine, and I usually use iBooks or VoiceStream Reader on my iPhone to read it. Now, this is an area where, boy, if a student is really having a problem using um, the version that the school university is using, it is possible to go through ATN and get an unprotected EPUB version. And Dawn, you might talk about that better than I could.
Sure, and just a quick follow-up to what you were saying. One person asked, George, is this the same as DRM?
Yes, it is DRM.
Right, digital rights management.
Yep.
That would be the protection that the distributors can put on to the file so that it can't be shared, correct?
Right.
All right, and there is actually, oh, I'm
Doc,
sorry.
I just wanted to mention that, you know, if these students also are members of Bookshare, a lot of our Bookshare materials, hundreds of thousands, are now, you know, available in EPUB. You can download that, and we don't DRM it. We do watermarking, so social, you know, watermarking, so that we know that this person downloaded the book, so that we don't, you know, they can't just share it with everyone. But that means that they could use whatever reading system that they want, that if, as long as they can side load an EPUB, then they can use that as well. So that's an option for folks.
And you can side load an EPUB into the VitalSource Windows version. I just paste it into the folder and I can open it up. And I use Edge or VitalSource on my Windows machine a lot, especially for complex materials. If it's a novel or something like that, you know, there's a lot of software out there that'll read it. But if I'm really studying, my personal preference is to do hardcore studying on my Windows machine. But that's just me. And of course, the students of today, the younger students, they do everything on their phone and tablets. So it's a lot of it's personal preference.
Okay. One person is saying that they work in disability services and that they typically get a digital copy in PDF format from Access Text. And does Access Text make EPUB copy available if they have one? So the way that works is on Access Text, it's completely up to the publisher as to which formats they would like to provide. I have noticed a trend of more and more publishers uploading EPUBs, either solely or in addition to PDF. So in previous years, EPUB stored files were in the single digits. As of 2018, there were 564 stored. So that number keeps going up. So I think the basic answer to your question is that yes, if the publisher has an EPUB, they can make it available to you on Access Text. All right. Is this accessible for foreign language majors as well? I assume that means is EPUB accessible perhaps?
EPUB is used throughout the world, all languages. I say all languages, but you know, it's those that have text-to-speech support, which is, you know, quite a few. There's some not oddball. There's some small language groups that don't have a text-to-speech engine. Some languages don't have even scripts, so you know, those are tough. But yeah, you know, if you want French, Hachette, one of the largest publishers in the world, is actively promoting EPUB. They require every one of their vendors to run ACE on the titles they submit, and when they get the title in, they run ACE to make sure that it's accessible. Italy has a strong program. So yeah, all over the world, it's based on HTML. So HTML, essentially we could say whatever languages is supported in HTML is supported in EPUB because it's simply based on the HTML standard.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And I believe this is a follow-up question to when, George, you were talking about the DRM platforms and if it wasn't working for the student. So the process would remain that the disability office would contact the publisher directly to get the unprotected files for a student with a print disability. It's a question and a statement.
Yeah, I think that's right. But make sure that the student has your support in helping them to learn how to read the books in the protected version. So, for example, Red Shelf is, and they're very good about providing the EPUB unprotected. But boy, reading the Red Shelf title online in their system is pretty darn good. So give the student enough support to help them use the same reading system that the rest of the students are using at the university instead of using something different.
And Don, something I forgot to mention is that Vital Source and is having a partnership with Benetech and our Global Certified Accessible program, so that any titles that are stamped from a publisher as Global Certified Accessible will go into this. It'll go into all of their, the main repository of bookshelf. But we're creating our own white labeled storefront, as it were. And all of those titles will show up there. So it'll be a single place that people can find any accessible EPUB that has been certified by Benetech, which will be great to help find these accessible books.
Oh, that's great. I have been wanting something like that for years, where I could just go to a place and find all accessible books on that platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wonderful. Let's see. When we provide a book to a student through disability services, how do we know if it's EPUB?
The extension is .epub. So if you get a file that's EPUB, it'll just be .epub.
Which is, yeah, that's true until you get to some like Vital Source also has EPUBs and PDFs, and sometimes you don't know what you're looking at, right? Which is tricky. I don't know if there's a way. I think there is a way in Vital Source that you'll see the type and it'll say either PDF or EPUB as well.
And if you ever have the choice of getting the EPUB or PDF, oh my God, get the EPUB. It has so many built-in fundamental accessibility features, even if it's not certified as being accessible. An EPUB is just inherently more accessible than a PDF.
All right, and I think since we're at 2:59, this will be the last question, but it's a good one. So if a file is certified, would students need to ask disability services for a file, or can they just buy the ebook at the same time as other students?
Buy it.
Exactly. This is what we want. We don't want to have to wait for someone to remediate it, fix it, and not get it at the same time. this is the whole point of having a born accessible book, means you get it at the same time as everyone else. And,
Great way to close.
yeah.
I know, that was perfect. Okay, so if we didn't get to your question, I saw another one just popped up, but I will reply offline. Thank you guys so much for presenting this webinar. It was very informative. We really appreciate your time and expertise. And to all the attendees, thank you for joining us. And we will get this video posted on the resources page very shortly. Everyone have a fabulous day. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot.